Hello, everyone. Welcome to Coaching with Mastery and Elegance with Tijen Genco. Today, we have a very special episode. We're recording this in January 17, 2024. And somehow, when I was doing my reflections for this year, I had a desire to have a special series in this podcast that was going to be focused on mastery. And I was going to talk with the different masterful coaches. And therefore, I thought about what would be the best way, other than starting the very first of the series with my mentor, Marion Franklin, and one of my students. She's also now a very skillful mentor herself, Marianne Gernetzke. Welcome both. Wonderful to have you here.
Great to be here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you.
Absolutely. So before we get into the heart of the conversation, I would like, although that Marion doesn't need any introduction to the audience that is going to be tuning into us, but I still would like each of you to share whatever you would like our audience to know about you. Let's start with you, Marion.
Okay, thanks, Tijen. So my vision, passion, mission all along has been to help coaches do a better job and realize that all they have to do is much simpler things than what they're doing. And basically make it a lot easier to be a really great coach. And that's always been my thing. And so the mentoring has been just fun, really, not work for me at all. And my book, The Heart of Laser Focused Coaching, apparently is being very well received. So I must have touched a nerve somewhere in people. And I have an upcoming book, What Would a Wise Person Do? Simple Ways to Cultivate a Fresh Mindset and Find Inner Peace. And that book is not necessarily for coaches, but ironically is brilliant for coaches because it's all about human behavior and helping coaches, particularly, to understand not only themselves, but also to understand their clients a lot better.
Absolutely. Beautiful. And do you want to also speak a little bit about the laser-focused coach training, Marianne?
Yes, so I offer a laser-focused coach training program, and Tijen is one of my brilliant instructors. And that program is an intensive based on my book. And it really is, from the beginning, about masterful coaching. It's not what's typically out there, which is let's gear this for beginner coaches or let's gear this for, whatever. It's really masterful coaching from the beginning. And what that does is it prepares even the newest coach for what they need to aspire to become a great coach, versus learning something and then having to unlearn and relearn because they realize masterful coaching is something very different. So from learning it from the very beginning seems to really, while it can be challenging, but from what I've seen, it works. And it's also a lot of times it attracts people who want to improve their coaching, not just brand new coaches.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Marianne. And Marianne, what would you like our audience to know about you?
Well, I can share that I am a health and wellness coach, and I'm also a mentor coach, a fairly new mentor coach. I find that mentoring is one of my very favorite coaching roles, and I'm really working to develop those skills now, while also really wanting to bring to others what you have given me, Tijen. Really being able to strive towards masterful coaching, right from the beginning, just as Marion was just describing.
Mhm.
Something that I've really enjoyed as I've prepared for this conversation today is rereading the Laser Focused Coaching book and seeing, although I've never met Marion before or taken the Laser Focused Coaching course, seeing those teachings mirrored in what you have taught me, Tijen, in your own unique way.
Mm.
So
Beautiful. Thank you, Marianne. So, Marianne, you're also going to help us facilitate today's conversation about masterful coaching. Where would you like to take us to?
wonderful. Well, it's really a privilege to be part of this initial conversation in your series this year on masterful coaching. And I know that your vision for today, Tijen, was 3 generations of mentor coaches talking about masterful coaching. So I'm wondering, what would you like to share with the audience about our lineage, if you will, as coaches and mentor coaches?
Certainly, I mean, my lineage, I met Marion when I was going through my coach training at the UT Dallas program, where I had many instructors and mentors. And I met Marion during the practicum. And the minute I met her, I felt like, oh, wow, that's it. Because her feedback was heartful, challenging, and very direct, that stretched me in a lot of different directions. And I, as you know, Marianne, and I will repeat for my for the audience that the people don't know, I was a mastery level Lean Six Sigma service and process excellence expert. So that's when I look at things, I look at what is cluttering and what needs to be removed here. And that's where Marion was teaching me that efficiency in coaching and not asking unnecessary things, not saying unnecessary things. One of the things she said early on to me, that don't waste the prime real estate, Tijen, in the conversations. They stayed with me. So mastery, in a way that have a lot of functions within it. But often, as a Lean Six Sigma expert, I would say to my clients that the most effective solutions are the simple and elegant ones. And therefore, when we are facilitating the mastery in our partnership with the clients, or when we are teaching about it, it needs to support the simplicity and elegance. So that's what I would like to get us into the pathway. How's that?
Very good. So as you've shared these things, Tijen, you're starting to um, give us a working definition of masterful coaching. And I'd love to also ask you, Marion, how would you define or describe masterful coaching?
Well, it is so interesting having listened to Tijen, because one of the things I always talk about are the by the way comments. And I never, ever would have remembered saying that to Tijen. So it's interesting that a by the way comment stuck with her all these years. For me, masterful coaching is truly about not getting in one's own way. And it really is all in the listening. And everybody's heard all of these things. It's the who, not the what. Everybody has different language. But the truth is, it's about understanding the human being that's in front of us. And it's not about their situation. That's the backdrop. It's really about, who is this person? How do they think? How do they behave? What are their responses? What are their reactions? What goes on for them in their minds? And that's why understanding human behavior can be so helpful also. So for me, mastery, of course, there's a flow to the conversation, all of that. But it's also about what I call being responsive to the client, and I call it lead by following, because what I hear so often is the client offers up something, and the coach is already asking a question that moves on. And I've always been a proponent that you have to lead by following, meaning you have to pick up on what's been heard and use that in your next question. And a lot of people just don't do that. So for me, mastery is not getting into the story. It's about really following the client. And as Tijen mentioned, it's the questions, no wasted questions. And wasted questions are the ones that where the coach wants more information. And as I learned from Thomas Leonard, the originator, we never need to know any more information. We might be curious, but that's not important. What's important is who is this person and how are they managing their situation or not managing? What is creating the problem for this person? And that question that I tell people to hold in mind is so critical, because what works for one person doesn't work for another. And the same exact circumstances, one person says, oh yeah, it's fine. And the other person says, oh my God, I'm so freaked out. So we really have to adjust for that and really think, why is this person struggling with this problem? Because the next person might not be. So that's definitely a really important thing in mastery. And I think the other thing is, a lot of people are so focused on making sure the conversation goes well and that they get action and that they get this and they get that. And as soon as the focus is on any of those things, it's not masterful. Masterful is just literally being present. And even if you have no clue what's going on, you have to trust the process and really trust that it's going to be okay. As long as you're not getting into the story, it will turn out okay. The client will get to where they need to be with a different mindset and the ability to move forward because they're motivated to do so, not because you've given them some action steps. So, it's funny because in the coaching world, the word partner comes up I think a little overused, but nevertheless, it comes up all the time. But there is something about partnering. But more importantly, to me, it's about a natural conversation. And that's the other thing I hear that gets so screwed up. Coaches want to sound like coaches, and there's no such thing. Because as soon as you're trying to sound like a coach, you're not being a coach. It's basically being in a conversation, as I always say, as if you were having lunch with the person and you were just chatting away. The only difference is you're not sharing your own stuff. You're the one asking the questions. But for the most part, the language is the same as you would say to a 5-year-old, to a 90-year-old, to your friend, to your spouse, to anybody. It's no special words or jargon or coaching language. Even the word belief is a coaching term. We don't use that word in everyday life. We say, oh, it sounds like you believe something to be true, but we don't even use the word believe. So there's so many words that coaches just don't realize are part of the coaching jargon. And that doesn't belong in masterful coaching either.
Beautifully said.
Yes, excuse me. There's so much in what you've just shared, Marianne. Coaching with precision and efficiency, coaching the person and not the story, not asking for information that you don't know, and then speaking with common language, having that natural conversation. Beautiful. One thing I'm curious about in recognizing that need to be in a place of just conversation is, how do you recognize when you are in a place of masterful coaching or you are listening to a session of masterful coaching? What are the things that come forward for you in your personal experience?
You mean as a mentor or listening to to someone's conversation? I think it's what I call the coaching curiosity versus the nosy curiosity. It's really that coach wanting to understand the person. It's not getting trapped in any of the story part. There's a kind of a flow. There's also, I want to say, an ease of not knowing. In other words, being okay with just letting it flow. I mean, you can hear that versus trying to force it. And my biggest pet peeve, as everybody knows in every talk I've ever given, is not enough silence. And the silence is so, I want to say, bastardized. It's just not used enough in a way that it needs to be. So, yeah, I feel very passionate about that for sure. So when I'm listening, well, the first thing I do is interesting because I used to ask for a transcript even before transcripts were a requirement. And and people bitched and moaned, but I did it anyway, because I look at a transcript and what I'm looking for is coach, maybe like a line or two, and then client, a paragraph. Then I know the coach has asked something that's provoking the client to really speak and share versus a line. Right away, I know this is not masterful. So that's my really first clue. I look for or listen for that lead by following. Wait a second, the client just said they were struggling with something, and now I hear something move, yeah. So that's a big one. Missing the by the way comments that I mentioned before. Somebody sneaks something in very quietly off the cuff, and it gets ignored. Coaches who are afraid of getting into any kind of emotion, when the client is obviously there's something going on. I think the other thing that's really important that very often is not done well is reflection. So the client brings something and the coach either parrots it or ignores it and just does what I call a naked question. Mm-hmm. And very often it's important for the coach not to share their opinion, but to, like I say, editorialize, but basically to share what they've heard as it came across to the coach. So it may not be the way the client intended, which is fine, but it needs to be interpreted and shared, and then let the client decide, yes, that's what I meant, or no, that's not what I meant. And masterful coaching is, okay, so I didn't get it right. Who cares? That's not important. What's important is that I'm now going to get the right information, so to speak.
Very good. Thank you. There's so much in what you shared. And one thing that I'm hearing is there's a real ease and a comfort with the unknown while also reflecting and asking deeper questions about the person before them. I find in my experience when I'm feeling in a place of masterful coaching, either as a coach or a mentor, it feels playful and intuitive. There is a real sense of ease about it. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear from you as well, Tijen. What are the things that you experience as you are experiencing masterful coaching?
Beautiful. You both said a lot of the things I would say. What I will then add the things that are not said that I look for. One of the things that I often say, and you heard me say this, Marianne, that as a coach, when we are in a place to completely be in awe with the client as another human being, like an art piece, and coach's ability to present space for client to self-express freely who they are and what they need to process in that space, that presence, which Marion talked about earlier, that ability to be present without disturbing the emotions and intuitions and whatever they may be. And what I also like to add is not translating. What I see that if the coach's authentic language is an analytical language, and the client is an emotional client, what coaches do in non-masterful coaching is receive the client's emotional language, translate into their analytical language, and present an analytical reflection or an inquiry. That actually dismisses the nuances, and that sort of like sterilizes the conversation that doesn't that loses the beauty and the magic. And the other thing is to be able to utilize their vessel, their human system in its full capacity, that their intuition, their emotion, their intellect, whatever that may need to be in that moment that is being called for, to show up with that. And also sometimes get out of their own natural responses to challenge somebody when they wouldn't, and normally, or be loving and caring when they are wanting to challenge somebody and be a little bit more challenging. And the core of it all, I think, that more I find, is the coach's ability to sit in their own heart, not in their head.
Mhm.
The connecting that way. Mm.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, Marianne.
Go ahead, Marianne.
I just wanted to add because when I was listening to Tijen so eloquently expressing herself, but I also thought, coaches think that there's a right question or a good question, and I've always said there's no such thing, and coaches try to make the questions so complex and so specific. And I've always said the simpler and the less specific, the better the question. And as I even have in my book, one of the best questions is, and what does that mean for you? Or what does that look like? Or what would help you to do that? They're just such simple questions, but they follow a very, I want to say, impactful reflection.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the real mastery can come.
Yeah. That made me also think one more point I wanted to say, that I often talk about distillation. That's the coach's ability to take the client's whole bunch of cluttered things and clarify and present it back to them in a way that actually starts to distill the conversation into a direction where they may need to go, which is still their choice. Yeah. What do you want to add to that, Marianne?
Yes. Oh, there's so many pieces to comment on here. As your student, Tijen, one of the pieces I hear coming forward is just the importance of listening to the client with my whole being and holistically listening so that I am taking in the entire client. And yes, I've heard you say it many times, and I think of it often. The client in front of me is a masterpiece, a work of art. And I really want to be taking in their energetic shifts, their emotions, and being able to sit with all of it, not just the words or the mental part of the client that they're presenting to me in what they're saying in the session. I also appreciate what you're saying about the translation and being sure that we're matching the client's way of expressing themselves, as opposed to expecting them to bridge the gap across different communication styles. There are so many nuances there that we could talk about. One thing that comes forward to me as I reflect on all of this is that in order to be fully present in the way that both of you are describing, a coach or a mentor needs to truly be doing their own work so that their own biases and past experiences don't interfere with their ability to take in the client. And so I'm wondering here if you might be able to talk about what are some of the things that you see getting in the way of masterful coaching in your students? And either of you can start.
Well, I think sometimes it's what I call a shared belief syndrome, which is when both the client and the coach are facing the same issue, we'll say, or challenge. Then the coach doesn't know how to be objective. So I think that speaks to your point of working on oneself, which is why my next book, as I say, is particularly helpful for coaches, because it is about working on oneself and becoming more aware. I think what gets in the way also is the coach relating in ways that it was or is for them versus how it might be for this other person. And, in other words, well, in my experience, divorce was disgusting, but it sounds like for you, it's not really all that terrible. It's, and yet I'm projecting all of my stuff onto the client. So that I do hear from time to time. I think it's also the coach, as you had said, it's not working on oneself and therefore trying to, quote unquote, develop confidence when in fact they themselves don't feel particularly confident. I think it's hard to project I'm okay when you're really not. And yet, so there's this, again, it's that coach role thing that I think I hear, I see that getting in the way a lot. And the ego, really, because the ego is the one, oh, I'm doing a great job, or, oh, I did a crappy job, or nobody really cares. The client doesn't know if you've done a good job or a bad job. They're just happy somebody's listening to them. So I think, it's not until we as mentors can hear they did a good job or a crappy job, but the client doesn't know that. And the coach is so wrapped up in that, how am I doing thing? So I hear the mentors, the client, the coaches getting really stuck there.
Yeah. What I would add, thank you, Marion, is the performance anxiety. And Marion talked about ego that makes them then not present. They have to plan ahead and do this, that, the other thing. One's coach's unmet needs. I often say, get your needs met elsewhere. Client is not there to satisfy your needs and figure them out and not bring them there. And also coaches' own traumatic experiences. You mentioned, Marianne, that when the coach, and Marion also mentioned, when the coach is not doing their own work, then there isn't enough resilience to be present for a similar topic. Besides identification, what I see is then the coach gets agitated. They want to move the client to some kind of solution so they don't have to observe what they haven't figured it out yet. And that resilience needs to be there so that we can be fully present and indifferent. So then the client can choose to act, not act, and be more sad about, go backwards, whatever, and giving them that space. And the one other thing I would add is the space. Our energy is going to come in, right? Energetic coach that I am. I'm very sensitive to the energies. And we need to be careful about what we are bringing energetically besides our intellect into the space, and be sensitive about that.
Yeah, that actually brings up another thing for me, which is there are times where coaches have this idea that they have to move the client forward in some way. And there are times when people are not in that place and it's not being acknowledged, it's not being supported, it's not being recognized. And it's very sad. You know, somebody gets a cancer diagnosis and the coach is all about, well, let's see how we can work this out, and let's see, you know, or let's go back to your job applications that you're working on, or whatever. They're just not sensitive to someone who needs just somebody to listen in that time. It's not about normal coaching or moving the client forward. It's about just giving them their space to process whatever they're going through. And coaches don't necessarily do that because they're so focused on the rules and what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, beautifully said. And sometimes it is not pushing or pulling them forward, rather pulling them back.
Yeah.
When somebody isn't ready and they feel the pressure to move ahead in something, I often reflect on that in a magnified way for them to see it and then challenge their readiness. So that's a very important point too. Yeah.
Yes, as you talk about this, it brings me back to the concept of partnership. I think truly masterful partnership with the client doesn't try to necessarily move them anywhere, but is open to the possibility that the client may not want to move, may just want to look at their issue in one way or another without movement. And that's a deeper level of partnership that a lot of coaches might be utilizing in more conventional coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I made the distinction in my book about transitionary inquiries versus stationary inquiries. That has to be, some things we say needs to hold them in space, and some things we say it needs to get them somewhere else. And they're being able to distinguish the moment to do so. It's part of the mastery too. Thanks for bringing that forward, Marianne.
Yes, yes. So our self-management of our own issues helps us to be aware of our biases and helps us to have a not just a presence as a coach, but the energy that we bring to the session. And as you were talking about this, Tijen, I also wanted to just bring forward something that you've taught me and your other students, is that when you do this work, it can become your superpower too, because you can have points of insight from going through as a client yourself, that you can really have as a gift for your own clients if they're ready for it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yes. So how do you, I want to ask as our next question, how do you express your own mastery as a mentor and as a coach? And perhaps we've already been talking about this all along, but I'm just curious about if anything comes up for you as I ask the question.
I can get us started here. For me, I think the mastery, we talked a little bit earlier, and both of you mentioned about the playfulness. There is that ease. So anything can happen. And that's, I often hear from my clients that the playfulness gets, they call it magic, because that in that space, there are permissions are given, and they actually allow themselves to new expressions of themselves. And I think that playful exploration is part of the mastery, because what I'm noticing more and more, that the real aspect of coaching is to have the partnership to help the clients to not only find where their edges are, and having the courage to explore the edges, and then, as we were talking about earlier, decide to whether they're going to expand the edge or go backwards or stay at the edge. And that is the self-discovery. And that's the coach's ability to take them to those edges and figure out how they can expand their self-expression. And another thing that you're familiar with my mentoring and coaching, Marianne, about reauthentication of the self. The social upbringing gets us away from who we authentically are. And as we get into the mastery, to be able to see someone's spirit and invite them back to that is the true mastery. And I feel that is almost like a calling. That's how I treat it that way. Yeah.
Beautiful. What, if anything, might you like to add to that, Marianne?
Yeah, what occurred to me was, when Tijen was talking about the ease and the being authentic, for me, I know it's masterful when I am willing to put the truth in someone's face in a way that they can hear it, but to really put it out there without the hesitation, without, it's so ironic. I hear coaches say, "Oh my God, you're so bold," or "You're so brave," or "You're so courageous," and I want to throw up, because the truth is I'm not. I am just being authentic. What I just heard was so ridiculous, or it was so painful, or it was so terrible, whatever it was. And I am willing to I have, discovered ways that we can say what it really sounds like and have the client actually hear it. And that to me is what makes it masterful, in that there's no fear in showing up as real. I think that's so important, because and being vulnerable as well. I think there used to be, years ago, when they had different barometers, I want to say, for what's masterful coaching, but the word vulnerable was in that description.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer there, but it was in the description originally. That the coach is willing to be vulnerable with the client. And what that means is, I really don't know how that would be, or I'm really not aware of that. Being really honest, with the client. But also, as I say, putting whatever comes, however something comes across to you, just really being able to put it out there. And really, I want to say what I kind of describe as pinning the client to the wall, really putting their stuff in their face so they have to look at it, versus beating around the bush, or trying to be nice is the other thing I hear that's so crazy. But just really being able to say, the way that comes across to me, it's as if there's no way somebody could have received that in a positive sense, or something, whatever. And then questioning the client, of course. But my point being, I'm not afraid to say whatever needs to be said. In the beginning, yes, of course, there was a lot more fear. And quite frankly, I still think I was more direct than most new coaches, partly because I'm a New Yorker, but also I do remember, and I have shared this, I had a woman who was debating between me and another coach that I knew at the time. This was, 25 years ago. And she, she said she was trying to decide which coach to choose. Should it be me or should it be this other woman who was lovely? And in the end, she went to her mentor friend and she said, what should I do? And the mentor friend said, who do you think is going to do a better job of getting you to where you want to be? And she said, I guess it's the one that wasn't quite as nice, which is how I got the job. It turned out to be one of the best clients I've ever had and ever worked with in my lifetime. But I think that was really a distinction, because it's not that I'm not a nice person. It's not that I don't love the client or really care about them. It's that I'm willing to put their stuff in their face. And that is probably, unfortunately, more unique than it should be.
Mm. Yeah.
Direct communication indeed is so challenging to new coaches. I mentor primarily right now students who are preparing for their ACC credential. And I find that I'm often pointing out the things that they are not even realizing they could say. It's coaches. Here's another place where we need to do our own work and look at our biases, because there's so many things that we come into coaching not knowing it's okay to say out loud. And that is such a powerful part of coaching education, I believe.
Yes, and because it's what you're both bringing forward is a cultural wound around the world, that the stuff, put it under the rug, don't say anything. And so that is part of the coach's work, that they need to break through out of those cultural wounds to come to a partnership from that place. Yeah.
Yes. Speaking of the culture and biases, how do you recognize when your mentoring or teaching methods are truly helpful and not your own personal biases?
Yeah. I think when I am assessing, you didn't ask me that component. When I'm assessing, then there are guidelines, right? Either I'm looking at ACC bars, MCC bars, or PCC markers, and so on, or another, whatever the assessment tool is. That helps. But when I am mentoring, I treat my mentoring conversations as my mentee is my coaching client. I get to be very curious about it, so that not my biases are being transferred, but I get to be admired by them. What are their brilliance? And how is that brilliance is going to touch to their coaching? And that's what I'm doing. I'm actually deep diving in a way that looking for those gems so that they appreciate. Because sometimes when I was in corporate, people used to tell me, oh, every year and feedback. Tijen is so inspiring. Okay, but what? Now I know how good of a gem it is. I can inspire people to their potential. But so we don't know some of the gifts we have. We don't know how to best utilize them. So I am there in that partnership looking what is it that they don't see and what is it that they see but don't fully potentialize. So that's the things that I do to get on my biases. And obviously, this is why all three of us are teachers, right? There are things we love and it's going to become through our biases. And that's okay, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I have actually shared with clients that I have a very strong opinion right now, and I'm not sure I can be so totally objective. There are times where I can't. There are times where I'm actually learning from the client. So, for example, a client from another country where I will say something, and the client said, well, in my family, it's very different because we do X, Y, Z. And I'm thinking, oh, well, that changes things. If they do X, Y, Z there, then I can see where this is coming from. And now I can gear myself to, so my biases are I'm an American, basically, and so because coaching is so international, we do have to understand, different cultures, different systems, different ways of looking at things. But there have been times where I have been honest with the client, and I've said I have a very strong opinion or a strong bias here. I think we can't ever truly erase them or keep them out 100%. I don't think that's possible because we don't even know we have them sometimes. Like I said, I'm a New Yorker, and there are things I take for granted, and other people certainly don't. So I think it's impossible to truly erase them. I think it's important to be aware of them, but I also think we're not advising clients, right? We're not making suggestions. We're not telling them what they should or shouldn't do. So I think as long as we can be open in a the real curious, the real coaching curiosity way versus the nosy curiosity, I think we can learn. And as we're listening, we can then adjust our own biases, I think, up to a point, but I don't think we can ever truly come. I mean, yes, it would be lovely if we could come like, Gandhi, but I don't think we can really totally do that in reality. We can get close, of course, but I don't think we'll ever actually come without our own opinions and ideas and ways of doing things because it's what we know.
Lovely. One thing that I hear from both of you is while it's important for us to be aware of our biases, there are also things that make each of us unique. Tijen, you do truly help your students discover their gifts and how to bring that to coaching. And as you were speaking, Marion, one of my reflections is we would be so boring if none of us had any biases at all, and we could all show up exactly identically, right? So our past experiences also help make us unique as coaches and as mentors, and that's worth appreciating as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, beautifully
Yes.
said. Yeah. I mean, but it is hard. Both, I'm sure both of you will appreciate this, that when I'm listening some of the coach recordings as an assessment, obviously, if it is starting right off the bat with a whole bunch of unnecessary questions and things, then my bias is like, oh, it's such a bad coaching. And then I have to pull myself back in there. So yeah, there are ways to at least become aware, and then there are ways, as you said, Marianne, that use it as our uniqueness. Yeah.
Yes. One thing that I know is true of you, Tijen, is that I met you in my coaching program, and you have been teaching me Masterful Coaching since the very beginning. And at the opening of our conversation, Marion, you were also speaking about the importance of teaching Masterful Coaching to all levels of coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that really interesting. There may be coaches who hear this conversation who believe masterful coaching isn't important for me yet. I'm just a brand new coach. So I'm wondering if each of you could speak to what motivates you to teach masterful coaching to all levels of coaches.
So for me, that's easy, because as I had said initially, why learn something only to have to unlearn and relearn? So why not know what you're supposed to do from day one? What I also say, which is pretty interesting, and I make a real point, we always have an introductory call before the course actually officially begins. And I am very, very clear that the people who have absolutely no experience in coaching whatsoever are going to have an easier time than the people who have already taken training. Why? Because they haven't really learned transformational coaching. They've really learned transactional coaching for the most part, maybe a little transformational, but not totally transformational. And the person who has no training is open to what shows up. And so I do believe that it's really important to know what you're aspiring to and where you want to be versus, I want to say in quotes, mastering some simplistic transactional coaching only to find out that's not really where we're supposed to go in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully said. I mean, I also think about what is the full potential here and how one will get there. It is not about what I find, maybe it is my bias, that when people believe that people need to, I even heard this from in one of the places I was teaching from one of the instructors, oh, they are baby coaches. And what? Because why put your own limitation to somebody else? Own your limitations yourself. And I love to look at people, and that's my whole niche about highest potential. Whatever their potential is, my goal as a mentor is that how am I going to get them to that potential? Not to limit somebody's potential. If it, often the coaching is a secondary or tertiary profession. People are already well-established people. What makes people think that they are not capable of communicating? That I would question, right? So maybe it is the teachers or mentors' incapacities that getting in their way, but I don't see any other way but teaching the mastery.
You're holding your students as creative, resourceful, and whole, just as you're teaching them to hold the client in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, I would say that I was very drawn towards you, Tijen, in my coaching program because you were teaching masterful coaching. Coming from a healthcare profession, I wasn't wanting to just learn another sort of transaction with my clients. I wanted to learn something much deeper than that. And I appreciate that. And I can also offer that right now I am beginning my journey. I have a PCC credential and I'm beginning my journey towards the MCC credential. And I'm hearing from other coaches, it makes them angry that this transition for them means unlearning what they were taught. And I'm so thankful that I'm building upon a strong foundation rather than having to start over from scratch. So thank you to both of you.
Our pleasure, right? I mean, this is the thing that I often do my best to avoid the credentialing levels, because that doesn't equate to the mastery.
Right.
There are a lot of transactional MCCs, transactional
Yes.
PCCs.
Yes.
Right?
And a lot of masterful ACCs. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that designation anyway, don't get me started. Oh,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
This has been such a rich conversation, and I'm sure we could speak for hours about this topic. But I am appreciating the time, and I know that we need to begin to bring this to a close. So I'd love to end with a final question. What do you find surprises your students the most about masterful coaching?
I think it's how much they learn about themselves.
Mm.
They really don't expect to transform or to change. They just think they're going to learn some skills, but instead they learn more about themselves and who they are. And especially because I have a whole lesson on, we coach from the place where who we are and where we are. And we all come from a different place, so to speak. There's several different, I want to say, what do you call it? I can't even think of a word now, but different structures. And we come from these different places, different frameworks, and we coach from that place. So I think they're so surprised when they realize how much they change in the process of being mentored and learning these skills that they thought would just be just that. Like taking a class at school, you just learn whatever the teacher tells you and you read and you practice or whatever. But in coaching, there's their own transformation that goes on that just shocks them, really.
Yeah. Yeah, what I would say that when I'm mentoring, especially in the beginning, people in the mentor practice sessions, they will do their coaching and then they are just going all around and all around and round. And I say, what do you want to really say? And then they will say, want to say this, or what are you curious about, really curious about that? And then I'm curious about that. And then I say, why don't you just say that? Oh, can I say that? I didn't know that. So
Yeah.
how, as Marion was saying earlier, how really a regular conversation coaching is like, and that's where the mastery is. That's how they are often surprised about that, what is okay to say. And another thing is the playfulness, the magic of that. And also what surprises my students, which are, I mentor and teach around the world, but mostly I think that's the Western mind influencing the rest of the cultures, that bringing intuition, having the permission to bring intuition or emotional language or anything else, they feel like, oh, is that okay? Oh, I didn't know that. So those are some of the surprises. But what surprises you, Marianne, as you went through some of my trainings?
Well, I can definitely resonate. I'm a nice Midwest girl, right? And there are lots of things I didn't know I could say out loud. And I think that's why I brought that point forth before. There were many moments, Tijen, where you said to me, why don't you just say that? And that was certainly a surprise, but I very much appreciate that. I think I'd like to add one thing too that I'm not sure either of you has mentioned, and that is teaching the student not to take what the client says at face value.
No, don't believe the client.
Yes.
I wanted to name my book that, Don't Believe the Client, but I've always said I wouldn't get any sales, so I changed it. But that was my dream, to name the book Don't Believe the Client. Yeah.
Yes. For the listener, if you haven't read the Laser Focused Coaching book, you can learn a great deal about this there. And I've also learned a lot about this from you, Tijen, to look for the thing beneath the thing. That if we can coach the client around their deeper need, their deeper why, we will get to much more profound places with them, and the change that results is much more transformational and sustainable.
Yes, beautifully said. Thank you, Mary.
Yes.
Mhm. So then thank you both for this beautiful conversation. Is there anything else that you wish to say to feel complete? And also anything that you have upcoming you want to inform our audience about? Let's start with you, Marion.
Well, as I had mentioned in the beginning, my upcoming book, which I'm really excited about, What Would a Wise Person Do? Because, yeah, I think it's going to be really helpful. I am not taking on new clients or, yeah, I do have the laser focus coaching course going, and that, people can certainly sign up for. So that's, all I would, in quotes, plug because, yeah, I'm not up for any more than what's going on right now. And I think in closing, I just want to say, especially for newer coaches, coaching isn't rocket science. It's really understanding the human being. And that's why the whole chapter I have on themes can be so helpful because the stories repeat. They have different words, they have different people, different characters, but it's the same story over and over. And like I've always compared it to movies, love conquers all, boy meets girl, whatever. It's just going to be the same thing over and over again. It's going to be somebody with poor boundaries. It's going to be somebody who has an authority problem. It's going to be somebody who can never make a decision. It's just going to repeat over and over. And once you start to see those patterns, it makes coaching so much easier.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you, Marion. I say that thankfully we have just very few, maybe one or two spiritual lessons in our life to learn. And we spend whole life trying to learn the same thing. Absolutely, yeah. And what about you, Marion?
Well, I want to make sure I say thank you so much to both of you, Tijen and Marion, for this lovely conversation and the opportunity to be a part of it. And in terms of things that are coming up for me, if listeners are interested in working with me as a coach or a mentor, they can find me at createhigherwellbeing.com. They can also find me at mariannegernetzke.com, but Gernetzke is hard to spell, so there is an alternative path to find me. And I also want to mention for listeners who are health and wellness coaches preparing to take the national board exam, I teach a national board exam prep course that was designed by Tijen, and our next cohort starts in March.
Yes, and we have a 100% success rate for that for the first-time takers and the repeat takers. Come and join us. Marianne delivers the course beautifully. And thank you for that, Marianne. And what I want to say that for those of you, if you liked what you're hearing here, you can also find my offerings at gencocoaching.com under upcoming events. You've been tuned into the original podcast from Genco Coaching. And if you like this, please consider following us, giving us a feedback, and checking us out. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for putting this all together.
Thank you for being here.